Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa. Today we have Ben Gerloff on the line. Ben, you've been a guide for quite a bit of time now. You actually were a veteran, did some extensive traveling for that, and as well for the fly fishing side of things, and really kind of have made a lifestyle out of it. And as you mentioned to me earlier, one of the big things for you is overcoming some injury and really dedicating yourself to the wellness and self-care aspects of fly fishing, but that's led you to some amazing things. So we're going to chit chat about some of that stuff, and then we're going to wrap up the show with a tip from you about why it's not important to change your fly all the time and how to really overcome that methodology that so many people have adapted. So yeah, man, good to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you're based out of Northwest Colorado, Meeker area, an absolutely amazing place for fly fishing. And there's all kinds of different opportunities up there, ranches, private ranches, public water, etc. But you've fished all over. You had mentioned you'd fished almost every river in Argentina, etc. Why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background on how the wellness thing came into play, and then we'll dive into some of that fishing.
Yeah. So I did 8 years in the Army. I was a paratrooper, and I kind of had big aspirations, so I always kind of volunteered for everything. And I found myself, after my third deployment, we had returned, and I kind of, I had aspirations to go Special Forces, and a lot of that tied in, and I'd already been selected, and I was going through the training process. And what happened was, as I ended up 2 days after my last deployment on a training jump, and I burned in, broke my back, dislocated both shoulders, tore this labrum. I rode my rucksack in at 3 a.m. It was a pretty bad jump.
Yeah.
But I was so mad because some kid, his chute passed over mine and it collapsed, and it was a 40-foot free fall approximately. So that put me within 6 months, pretty much in a bed because I was refusing to have surgery. They told me, they're like, hey, look, you can go through this. It was like a physical therapy process, and that's all pre-surgery and all that. But my physical therapist just kept having to rotate through, and I would never get the full approval for the surgery. And I didn't want it either. I was doing as much as I could to get away from that.
Yeah.
What I did instead is like dry needling. So you take like that big long needle and shove it up in you. I did a lot of spine stabilization, mobility stuff, massage, and then that's when I kind of found like sensory deprivation. Being that was so close to that deployment that I'd gotten hurt, I missed the redeployment activities.
Okay.
And it wasn't a bad deployment, but there's a huge adjustment disorder that you kind of have coming out of those. It lasts a couple months, sometimes up to 6 months or a year. It just kind of depends on how you coped.
Yeah.
So missing that, I ended up I was going every holistic route I could because I didn't want them cutting on me. I was like, dude, I got to go. I'm going to go down here and, the Reiki healer lady, and I had some like big lady with cats all over the room do that. And I didn't buy into that.
Yeah.
kind of crushed my soul a little bit seeing how that worked. But the Army was doing a study on sensory deprivation at a spa that my wife had worked at the time, and she's a massage therapist.
Talk a little bit about that sensory deprivation. Like, what is that? I'm not super familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's crazy. I didn't know what it was either because I was going through this stuff at my wife's recommendation, and I didn't realize how much of that kind of industry is like, it's give and take. A lot of it's just whatever you believe in it. Whatever you believe is working, pseudoscience stuff. But sensory deprivation's been around for a long time. The history is kind of funny because the military used it to like, test like mind control and like drugs on soldiers. But the only reason my wife mentioned it, she's like, we're doing a study at the spa. You can come and do it for free. And I was like, I'm not going to do any more hokey stuff. And she's like, no, for real. She's like, just go sign up with this doctor and you'll get in there and they'll have you float. They'll train you how to do it. And, it's like, I don't know. And I was listening to like Joe Rogan one day and I heard about it. I was like, all right, so if he does it, I'll do it. And I did it. And, talk about like hitting a threshold in your life. I I came out of that tank after 90 minutes on the first one, just being by myself, and it felt like I'd been standing in an aspen stand back home. With nobody
Wow.
around. Like I just got a whole day of therapy in like less than an hour and a half, and it was just by being in there and like kind of. My dad says it's how you let the demons in, because you're vulnerable. But I found it more proactive than talking to any therapist, especially in regards to like my PTSD. Mostly because you're in there confronting yourself and your own thoughts, and you're trapped in a room and it's dark. You can't feel anything, you can't hear anything, and you're floating in Epsom salt.
Okay.
So you come out of there, no matter what, you're going to feel good because your weight is off your bones for a couple hours, or an hour.
Right.
And your brain is just, it hits this, they call it like a theta state. So
Yeah.
this like, high brain activity occurs in there. It's essentially like what happens when you hit REM cycles. Or a lot of people that meditate don't understand what the theta state is. They just go and like stare at a wall for an hour or two. They don't realize that once you hit that, that's what people are doing that to try and achieve. And you can force that on yourself,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
Yeah. My, sorry to interrupt, but my daughter does, some, neurostimulation. And it's there's a combination of things, but they talk about those states, that theta state and that beta state as well, and how to, and basically in her approach or her technology that she's using, it's stimulating that. So it's almost like exercising your way in and out of those states. And so how do you come back to your center point of relaxation faster? So real interesting. There's a lot of, I think, it sounds like some crossover there.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. I mean, if you could put it into any like layman's terms, it's maximizing relaxation. And it's great. Some people are too high strung for it. I'm pretty high strung, and I'm skeptical is my bad trait. But so I went in there not thinking it was going to do anything, and by the third float, I was able to go in there and kind of like, you kind of hallucinate. I mean, you're like dreaming while you're awake, and you're projecting your thoughts, and it's the strangest feeling when you do achieve that level of concentration and I don't know what to call
Mind
it.
over body kind of state, I would say.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I did it, and I don't believe in like SSRIs or anything like that. I self-medicate, of course, but that was one of the best, healthiest things I've ever felt. It's like coming off of like a runner's high. It's just a good feeling of levity. I suggest everybody try it.
Yeah.
But not to shill it too much. I mean, I'm super stoked that we got this tank in our little spa, because I'm going to be down there, once, twice a week.
Yeah, good on you, man. And you said you really take a lot of that and kind of cross over into the fishing side of things. I think the way you described it was like, hey, don't make your day about catching the fish.
Yeah,
And so let's kind of transition into that, and I want to hear your thoughts there. So
I approach fishing the same way I approach anything. It's you do it with intention, because if you do it without intention, then what was it for, in the first place? And a lot of times we misplace our intentions, and I found myself doing it. That's why I hated guiding as a little kid, because I've been around this. I grew up around guides. I grew up on big ranches. I've done it since I was young. The thing I hated is I wanted to catch all the fish, and if I had a client that wasn't capable, I lost patience really quick, like most young guys, and but I didn't have the right intentions. And like those guys that like we were talking at, like the Blue Quill guys, when I was guiding there and teaching these classes, that's one of the things I had to learn, is you had to go there with the intention to teach and to learn at the same time. And you have to make that clear to yourself. Even though you're the teacher, you're absorbing just as much as you're putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect was that too, is if you go there with the intention to catch fish, you're not going to catch fish, because your patience will not outlive, it won't outlast, your patience won't outlast your skill, or it'll always beat your skill. You'll run out of patience before you run out of skill.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective too, because, going out individually or with a guide, I'm very much the same. I like to have an objective for the day. What's my intention? And it varies for me. As a guide, it's a little different because you're trying to meet an expectation. So there's some pressure on you, and
Yeah.
it's totally different, scenario. And I've felt that, teaching friends or, taking my kids out and like, I just want to get into some fish with them,
Yeah.
and it's not an easy gig, man. I don't do it just for that reason because I really want to go out and just enjoy my time and not worry about the objective of getting fish, but maybe mastering a specific style or tactic, etc., and forcing myself into, I think, uncomfortable situations, right? So I'm comfortable at other times.
Yeah. That's a key to it, is make yourself uncomfortable. Fishing too, like the intentionality. I mean, that transcends into every bit of the service industry. And as a fly fishing guide, you're the epitome of the service industry.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of guides will tell you, I'm a horrible fisherman, but I am great at social engineering. And that's pretty much what people are doing. They're either a horrible, not most guides, even the worst guides, are better than your best fishermen. A lot of times they're world-class athletes. They've got insane, portfolios. I used to guide with this guy who had like the most advanced, the most number, or the highest number of advanced degrees than anybody I've ever met. He's like 45, and he's a fishing guide on the South Platte.
Yeah.
And this guy, all of it's in like hydrology and, everything. I mean, the guy knows everything. He's a scientist.
Yeah.
But, he lives up there around Bailey, and he hangs out on the river, and he's an epic fisherman. But at the same time, he's a better guide because he's better at, talking around the subject and
Yeah.
setting expectations, because we all have to set expectations, especially as a guide. Before you go on a trip, if that's not the first conversation you have, you need to kind of reevaluate your day, or maybe approach that as soon as you can, before you get to the water, because we all talk up our own fisheries.
Yeah.
And some days it's not hitting.
Yeah.
I've been humbled like that a lot. Especially with where I work, where I guide right now, it's an amazing fishery, and you can talk it up and be like, dude, it's going to be amazing. The drakes are popping. Yesterday, it's like 20 fish a person,
Yeah.
It was like, we only fished for a couple hours, and you let that slip because you think it's going to be a good day. And then all of a sudden the bugs aren't coming. There's a shift in, barometric, pressures. Something happened and blew the bugs off the water, and you're just,
Oh, no.
not happening.
It's not what I described. I set myself up. And then the pressure's on even more.
Yeah, and especially where I'm at. I mean, every person I take out, I'm going to see them again. And it's by nature of the way that we have the business structured, but every one of them, they're all going to come right back to me. And if they have a bad experience, they might not want to fish. They might want to go, ride horses or go shoot guns or do something else, anything but, and that's where the intention comes in. Because if you're like, dude, we're going to go to the river, we're going to have a great day. I don't know if they're biting or not, but the weather is incredible. I'm going to walk you down this willow path. It's all gorgeous. And
yeah, gosh, sounds amazing. Amazing.
Well, that's just setting expectations, because it's a beautiful area. And if you can get them more like interested in a flower than the fishing, the odds are, as soon as they start talking and relaxing a little bit, the pressure's off to catch a fish.
Right.
You don't even have to catch your first fish. Everyone's like, we got to get on the board. And it's like, don't even worry about that, dude. Like, go pick some flowers, eat that berry, and start talking. Because when the conversation flows, your casting flows, your nerves are out of your men's.
Yep.
And then, and that's why it's best to fish with a partner, especially on a hard day and it's going to be hard. If you can sit there and just be friends, and you'll probably notice this in your own fishing too. So if you're with somebody and the conversation picks up and you're talking about old girlfriends or high school stories or something, all of a sudden you're bent and you're like, how did that happen? It's because you're relaxed. That's the key to it. That's the philosophy that it transcends into your economy of motion.
Yep.
It's as soon as you start casting, everyone hits that pattern, and it's so hard to get out of it. But then all of a sudden you turn and you're talking and you're not watching, and that line just catches that perfect drift because you're not trying to control it. And because you can't control. There's only so many things you can control. I can't control the rain, and most of my clients can't control the fly line like I want them to. So I get them talking, and then they get on fish.
That's awesome. That's a great analogy. Let's do this. You're a guide, and I interview a lot of guides, but You're an angler at heart. You've been doing this since you were a kid. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier that I thought was a really cool perspective was really learning how to target fish at their level.
Mhm.
And I'm interested to hear more about that and what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I had a buddy, a real good friend, but we used to sit there and we'd fish right next to each other all the time. And he'd never change his flies, and he'd hardly ever touch his indicator. And the only thing I ever saw him do is he'd pull it out once in a while to check his weight. But I'll tell you, I've never seen somebody catch more fish than that dude. And talk about somebody that can walk up to the water and throw them right in there and just get hooked up. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, well, how much split shot are you using? And I was like, I don't know, like one, maybe two. And he's like, no, here's what you need. And he gave me some of the stuff. It's like that JP's tungsten mud, or JT, I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember his name. Gave me some of that. And I was like, whatever, dude, this stuff's like, it's kind of one of those hokey things, it's like $12 a little thing. And I was like, I'm not going to buy it. And I guess I'll try it. And when he went to adjust my weight, it looked like the size of a marble. I was like, man, the river's dead. This is frog water. It's not that deep. It's maybe 5-7 feet deep in the deepest part of the run. And he's like, no, just cast. And he's like, and you'll catch fish. And ever since then, and this is a long time ago, but ever since then, I've always kind of ran with that theory where instead of cycling through all your flies, you learn to kind of indicate where you learn the indications as to where the fish are in the column. And a lot of times you can see them, while you're walking up to the river. It's your basic observations, and if you know the water well enough or you fish it enough, that's maybe ankle deep. That's about 4 feet deep. And so if you can approach your fish that way, and decide whether you're going to tie on a dry fly or if you're going to put on a bunch of split shot, the three easiest things to adjust is, your depth on your indicator, easiest adjustment ever. No knots,
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Yeah.
And that 90% of the time, that's your problem. It's your depth and how fast you're getting there, so it's that and how much weight you've got on there, and if they're in the shallows, take all your weight off and chuck an unweighted fly off there into the shallows, and just
Mm-hmm.
tightline it. But you've got to approach the water and understand where you saw the fish, because that's a good indication of where they're actually feeding. And if they move from there, the odds are they're going to move to that same part on another bend or another riffle in that same depth,
Yep.
in that same column. And a lot of times it's just following the hatches, the emergers coming up. And as they come up and up, a lot of times they'll shift over to that shallow water and just look up so they can,
Yeah.
economy of motion again.
Yep.
They're not gonna. My friend Carrie says, "You're not. If I hold a Cheeto out across the 4-lane highway, are you gonna run across that highway to eat that Cheeto?" And people are like, "No." Well, what if I put it in your mouth?
Yeah. Right.
It's like, well, that would be uncomfortable, but I'd probably eat it.
Or at least put it on the sidewalk you're on, right? I mean,
Yeah. So I mean, you gotta be there, and the more accurate you can be with your depth and your actual targeting of the fish, that's primary. It's primary for everybody. And if you don't know, go deep, because even if you spook them, they're going to be in the bottom of the riffle. So throw as much weight as you can. And if you're getting caught every cast, peel off some weight until you're getting caught every other cast.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not seeing bottom at all, give up, because you're probably standing where the fish were,
Right.
and then you're
Right.
casting to where they are. Like, you got to get down there.
Yeah. When you're fishing in an area that you're, say, not familiar with, and you walk up, give me the like first couple things that you like to observe to set your initial rig depth and weight.
Yeah. So we can always go the South Platte method, which is you kind of gauge it. Most rivers, the depth doesn't change immensely that fast, as long as what do you call that? The grade of the river doesn't change immensely. It's going to generally be the same as it was downriver. So one of the first things I'll do, especially if it's like new water, I'll walk to some, part where looks about as deep as it's going to get, but I don't see any structure, any real good fishing spots. And I'll walk out there and just kind of gauge the depth. You don't always have to do that, because most trout water is, you're generally going to be between like 7 and 14 feet deep at the deepest.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of gauge your leader by that. if you get a 7.5 foot leader with, a foot and a half of tippet, you've got a good anchor point. You've got 7.5 feet, and you can go up to 9 feet deep if you need to. Because a big issue I see with people doing again is using super long leaders. A lot of people approach it with the 9 foot leaders, but I like the shorties. I'll shoot with the shorty, 4X, 7.5 foot, tie that on, and I'll run my indicator just off my fly line. So, I'll bring it about, I guess, 3.5 feet or 1 arm length from the tip of my fly line down that leader. Because you fish into the approach, right? You don't want to fish the water you like. So you're going to start shallow no matter what. You generally, depending on the spot, you might luck out and have a nice, deep run or something.
Right.
Even then, I'm going to fish the shallow side in, bottom up, shallow in, and just keep it as low of an approach as I can. Unless it's a really good looking hole, then I'm going to get down and avoid that bank and, walk up in the bushes as best I can, keep them to my back, and just drop that line in.
Yeah.
The odds are, if it's a good riffle, those fish will, be, even the ones in the shallows, if you have your indicator set, that's where like that weight dictation is important, because you don't have to worry so much about your depth. So set to fish deep at first, and by deep I mean trout water deep.
Yep.
So 5 to 7 feet to your point fly, or whatever fly you're using with the most weight. And then I approach with no weight, and then I pinch some on, and I go a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper without making any adjustments to that indicator. Sometimes you got to fish it tighter though on smaller water, but regular size rivers, that's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I'm kind of that way too. Usually try to gauge what the depth is. I go usually 1.5 times has always been my formula. And then, like you said, I like to leave some room to go deeper on my leader, or at least know that if I'm only fishing maybe one fly, I can add depth by adding a second fly, or even in Utah, you can fish 3 flies. So, those are some of my,
deep. Oh, sorry.
No, some of my progressions. And, the other thing too is changing up for me where the weight is. If I'm using the fly weight, I'll put a really heavy bug on the point to get even deeper. So you were going to say something?
Oh, I think you mean, oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest changes that's kind of came out, and, since I started, and, I've been, doing this for, 20 some odd years now, and I'm a young guy. So when I started out as a kid, throwing a bead on a nymph was incredible. That changed the game, back when I was a kid, and that was still kind of a newer thing, moving into tungsten. And then now you've got the Euro stuff, shout out to the Steve Parrott. But he gave me some flies when I started guiding at the Blue Quill, and I'd never fished a Euro fly before, and I thought it was just kind of nifty that there was a hook designed to be barbless, and a couple of my buddies over there were competition guys, and I started just using them as my nymphs. You lose less flies. I was catching more fish because innately your fly is going to be able to sit lower in the water column. And if you have a split shot on, a Euro nymph, depending on the weight, you can bring it closer to the bottom. So, one fly in 2 or 3 different sizes, like competition style, but fishing, like Western, like nymph setup. You've got your indicator, your split shot, and then you can really dial in your depth with those Euro nymphs. And it's a game changer. It's a game changer for like hopper dropper rigs too. Having a really heavy fly on there allows it to get down into the drift a lot quicker than anything you could do otherwise. Oh, you're still muted.
One of the things I like to do is, like you said, I'll fish a heavy Euro style jig fly, and then I'll put lead off of the back of that, like you said, and it's just like the we call it a bounce rig here in Utah. But it's very similar. So you have your lead, and what I like to do is use a lot of small pieces of lead, and they slink kind of over the rocks and the substrate. But like you said, it's you're coming down, you got your point, and then it's like a 30 or 90 degree angle, somewhere in between there off to your lead, and it's slowing it down enough and making it jig along. I've had some pretty good luck with that too.
Yeah, and with those Euro flies, fish them big and heavy.
Yeah.
like people are so afraid, so intimidated to break that 18, size 18 mark. It's like, dude, I don't want to fish a 16. That's too big. There's no bugs in here that are that big. And it's like, nope, trust me, man. It's got, because zero flies are, it was a guide I tie most of mine. So I tie all my favorite, fly patterns, on those zero hooks, because they're the jig that goes hook point up.
Yeah.
And then you tie them you just tie them sparse, and then you coat them. And they cut the water so much quicker than your standard, flies that there's no reason, because normal flies with all the with as much dubbing and stuff that's incorporated in them, and a lot of the commercial ones have a looser tolerances than you would if you're tying it yourself. So you have to get them wet before they actually start fishing. So you have to fish them for a while, get them nice and waterlogged, maybe put some Sink It on there. But the Eurofly is going to fish as soon as it hits the water, because it's either completely lacquered up, and there's no, where it's tied so sparse that it doesn't need any water, and it's got a giant tungsten bead on there.
Right.
That's been, if somebody can't fish, and you can't catch them even on worms, if you throw a big old, Euro nymph on there with a little bit of CDC around there with a sparse body, it's going to cut water, and it's going to be fishing for that. That's kind of the move I use for people that don't want to mend. You incorporate, instead of having the weight, on your split shot or whatever, you don't want to mend, whatever, but here's a giant Euro nymph. It's going to be hard to cast, but as soon as it hits the water, it goes straight to the bottom and it fishes for you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like rowing a boat for some of those clients that can't fish. You got to really row it into it for them.
Yeah. It's like a dredging technique, really. I mean, you're kind of setting up your rig so that the river does the work for you, and you're going to be in and out of good drifts, but you're going to get, those are, I consider, sacrificial drifts within your drift, right? So you chuck it up there and it's like, okay, I know I'm casting 20 feet and I'm going to get a 20-foot long drift, but I may only be fishing 3 or 4 sections of 4 feet, but I'm okay with that scenario. So I like it.
When I fish myself, I don't, especially if because I'm like a dry fly guy. I'm always on top. That's just my enjoyment. I like casting. I like the competitive side of casting. I'm not competition level, by any means, but I like throwing it in like the tightest little hole I can get it in. Like bouncing it off a tree, going over a branch, and just setting it right there over these little branches I know will break as soon as it gets hooked. I like doing that kind of stuff just because it's fun. It's very technical, but that's where I find my enjoyment. But if I'm having a slow day and I'm like, man, I just want to catch a fish, I'll throw a couple of zero nymphs on there and maybe a pulsa if I'm lucky, and just dredge bottom with a really tight line and kind of Euro nymph it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I don't have any Euro rods. I broke the only one I got. Well, it's weird when you walk around with an 11-foot rod. It's such a difference from a 7.5 foot.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for sure.
The first thing I did with that thing is shut up my tailgate.
I guess better you than your buddy, because then it's like, oh my gosh, your buddy feels bad. You're like, it's not a big deal. Oh man, it's funny.
Don't even get me started on those breaking rods. I got one guy who comes back every year. Last year he broke 5 rods in like 2 days.
Oh.
And I was so mad at him. He broke it, and he's like, "Oh, I think you stepped on your rod there." And I was like, "I know what you did. I know he was a person."
That's awesome.
But those are some of the funnest days.
The worst I ever saw was, I had a buddy of mine. We were fishing up in northern Montana, and caught a fish. He was excited, and he wanted his picture taken. An older guy, and he had a brand new rod and reel set up. He's an experienced angler, and he was looking down river, and he tucked his rod in between his legs and was holding it and held the fish up. Yeah. And then, I'm like, oh, great, I got your picture, buddy. And he rinses his hands off, and he turns around and he's talking to some of us, and all of a sudden he goes, "Where's my rod?" Oh my gosh. And he just, opened his legs, and it was gone, so yeah, it happens to everyone. We all make those mistakes. But
this was my first day on an Orvis and Doris ranch. I was helping cover down, and I was landing fish left and right. I was like, one of the funnest days I've ever had guiding, just period. It's a great group of guys, but I had my landing net, and I always keep it tucked under my arm. No, I have a rod under one arm, and I got my landing net, and I can usually function really well like that. But I got caught enamored in the moment, because it's just, I mean, those lodges are way different than your standard fishing affair. But I landed a fish. I turned around. We're getting the photos, and all of a sudden, a guy about a mile down the river is like hollering, and he's like screaming at me. And I'm like, "What the heck?" And he's got my
he's got your landing net,
and of course, I have my name like plastered on it, so he knows exactly. I couldn't get away from that one. I had to eat that.
Yeah, it's all right.
It was a blast.
It's all right. It happens. Let's do this, man. We're gonna jump into the last section of the show here, and talk a little bit about this challenging the common practice and often preached practice of change your bugs, change your bugs, change your bugs. And you learned from somebody that inspired you. Hey, there's only so many bugs in the water, and I don't think it's necessary to change. And you kind of really took that to heart and have put that into your repertoire. So dive into that, and let's see what you picked up from this guy.
Yeah, no, it's a real thing, and I didn't think about it until, I'd read every fishing book, especially my time in the military. I had 8 years of dreaming about getting back on the water. I'd sit there and tie flies. I did it in Afghanistan. And I just read these books, and I never liked fly fishing media. I always hated it. I hated the books. I had one fly tying book from like the 70s that I always went to. But overall, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't watch the videos. I couldn't read the books. But at that time, I read every one I got my hands on, every one of them. And they all say the same thing 10 different ways. And it wasn't until I was teaching 101 classes on the South Platte with Kerry Carriger. He's the guide coordinator at the Blue Quill. But I felt new to it when I came back to guiding. Because I was confident in my fishing, but I was constantly switching flies. And when we're out there with these brand new students and it's combat fishing, crowded river, conditions didn't feel right. The water might have been a little bit hot. And I'm like, dude, there's no catching fish. I'd look down the river and Carrie's catching fish with all these brand new first-time fishers or fishermen. And I was like, what the hell? And, we were talking one day and I was listening to his class as well. And he says that same thing that everyone writes in that book is there's four primary, insect species that the fish are targeting in any Western trout water, and the thing is, with only 4 profiles to follow, it's size, shape, and color. And if you have a middle of the road size, you have a middle of the road color, generally matching the substrate in the water you're fishing. And, the shape, just one of those 4 bugs. It doesn't even have to be in season. Stone flies, get rushed out with, sometimes when it rains. If you don't have faith in your fly, don't fish with it. Is my summation of everything. So you find a fly that represents one of those bugs. Doesn't even have to be a realistic colorway. Put all your faith into that bug. And if you really want to test your faith, cut all your flies off and just fish that one. And that's where the technique becomes the important part, because everyone says there's 4 bugs in the water, but there's, thousands of patterns. There might be 1 or 2 patterns you really like, even if it's an old one. But if you don't put faith in that fly and put the work behind it to make it fish, it'll ruin a day. It'll ruin multiple days. It might ruin months, because then you're going to go on a tirade trying to find a new fly to put all your faith into. And it might be one that doesn't necessarily work that well.
Right.
And it might be one of those weird weightless, like throwing an RS2 on, which is a great fly. But, sometimes that's just not, just get a do-it-all pattern and then figure out how to dial in your technique, where you're casting, and your weight. Your weight is huge if you're not dry fly fishing. Yeah. Your weight is immense. I mean, and if try it, anybody that's listening that's trying to get better, throw on more weight than you're comfortable with, because you can take, weight is a really easy thing, especially with that mud, that tungsten mud, because you shouldn't be, false casting a whole nymph rig. A roll cast will get it there, and with a little bit of that mud, it'll stay on there. but throw on more than what you're comfortable with. And the reason I say that mud is because you can peel it off, put it back in the bucket, you know, but make sure you hit bottom every cast, peel it off until you get a drift where every other cast you see bottom. You're going to get snagged a lot, but you're going to catch tons more fish. And it makes it so much more enjoyable. Keeping it really, really simple. That acronym, you know, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
It's your easiest adjustments, you know, your depth, your weight, and then then worry about your fly and tying knots. But nobody wants to be on the water tying knots, you know.
Yeah.
It's just immense. It's huge.
When you use that mud, how are you utilizing it with your lead? Do you like to have a couple pieces of lead on there first so it has something to kind of hold it? Because that's the number one complaint I hear is from the mud of like, oh, I put it on and it's like 2 casts and I don't have it on there anymore. And so curious.
So that comes back to patience. So people get impatient, and you get, my daughter does this thing when we go down to the river, and when she's sitting there fishing, she gets happy feet. Like, I'm like, you're not a penguin, you know, no happy feet, you know, quit dancing in the water, just stand still. Cause she does it subconsciously. Yeah. And we do that with our fly rods. You know, we flip them around. It's fun casting. But when you have a line of train cars that you're casting on that fly line, you don't want them to crash into each other. Right. So unless you can really open up your false casts, your loops really wide so they don't interfere with each other, I wouldn't suggest doing it. Number one, especially with the mud, make the sacrifice, just go for a roll cast, you know, water load it and shoot it out there. Yep. So I put on, you know, like a middle of the road split shot that I know is not going to get me there. You pinch the mud on that split shot, and I do this above my tippet knot. You know, 1, so your split shot doesn't come down, and 2, it's just a good anchor point. But also you have to understand that becomes a pretty sacrificial point at that point, because I'm a guide, so I plan around losing flies. I'm braver with my flies than most guys that are paying $2 a fly. So I go out with a whole pocket full of that same fly, you know, that one person might be able to only come out with 5 of. Right. So I put on a ton of weight, just planning on hitting bottom, and just a big old wad of that stuff. And when you roll it on, if you you encapsulate the whole piece of split shot and then dip it in the water, let it sit there for a few seconds and it'll harden up a little bit. And then as long as you can maintain your patience, it's also a good indicator of when you're getting frustrated, because the minute you do that and you lose it, you're like, what did I do? You know, and that's kind of a road you have to cross when you're on the water, and take a break, you know, maybe drink a beer or read a book for a minute and then go back to it. But that mud is, it doesn't take a whole lot of it because it's tungsten. So arguably, I'm not sure how the density compares to lead, but it's pretty dense. Yeah. But also it's more natural looking than split shot. When it's on the bottom, it gets there. I haven't had a problem with losing it. Yeah. Besides with people that are like, you know, with the happy feet, right? You know, they're out there just casting and they want to cast. They want to false cast that so bad, but the fish at your feet, calm down, throw more weight on, and just let it ride. Yeah. That's the patience is the trick with that mud. Otherwise you'll never like it. Yeah. And if you can't slow yourself down enough to have good clean casts or just roll casts, then I wouldn't suggest it, but it works wonders once you figure it out. It's way easy. It's easier than your depth, because you can even go too deep on your indicator. As long as you have enough weight, it's there. You're fishing. Yeah, and it peels off. That's the thing I like too, is, you know, rather than trying to pull off an individual piece of lead, it peels off. You could pinch it right off, put it back in, you know, use it again. So I agree. I haven't had too much trouble with it, but the one thing I have heard from people is, every time I use that stuff, it just comes off or whatever. I like your tip about getting it cold from the water and hardening it before you actually cast it out there. Especially because you are going to be ticking here and there, right? Well, less casting is the best casting, and that goes for even dry flies. Yeah. The longer those flies are in the water, the more they are. I'd almost be willing to argue that with dry flies, placement isn't key, but having good long drifts. Sometimes placement, a lot of times placement is the thing. But if you can't quite reach that sweet spot, or it's just out of range, just keeping that fly in the water, even if you're just standing there and it's just a lift and a flip.
Yeah.
And you're not false casting constantly. There's only 3 reasons you should be false casting: to change direction, to build up line speed, and to look good to your girlfriend down the road,
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, or, there's double hull, but
Yeah.
no, I mean, I don't know.
I agree.
Or dry your
It's
flies off.
if your fly's not in the water, you don't have the chance to catch a fish, right? I mean, that's the way I've always looked at it. And
You're showing off.
get it out there, be efficient. More time your bug's on the water, the better.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you can't quite get to that spot, that's okay, because there's likely fish in between here and there. That's likely not the only fish in the water. You'd be,
And one of my common observations, especially during like dry fly hatches, the fish migrate. So they kind of come out in concentric circles as they're fishing. And I've seen this on the drone too. When you'll see like a small pod of trout just kind of hovering like a really nice shelf, and then they'll move up, move out, move back, and then they'll kind of stay in the same area and, just kind of hover around like one piece of really good structure, like a piece of cut bank or something. So even, you're not going to catch fish where there aren't any, but if you stay in the same place long enough, eventually they're going to come right in front of you. And that's almost anywhere in the river. If it looks fishy, it probably is fishy. And sometimes I stare at the river so much, I know exactly where to go. But my client will be like, that looks pretty fishy over there. And, we're like, all right, dude, let's go.
let's go. Yeah.
And they drop it in. They're like, I told you, I should be a guy. And I'm like, oh, come on, dude.
Right. Blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while, they say.
Yeah, your instincts are usually pretty good. I mean, if you have a good feeling about a spot, but it works both ways. You can't just follow blind faith, but sometimes it's good to take that chance and just kind of change, trout like change.
Yep.
And if you don't change your pattern, your approach to the river every time you go, eventually the trout are going to figure it out.
Yep. Yeah. Well, cool. Hey, Ben, it was really good getting to know you, talking about all this stuff. And it sounds like you've been able to fish in some pretty amazing places. You're in Colorado. You got an amazing thing going for you. I wish you the best of luck with your back and whatnot and healing up. And let's try and do this again here sometime. And hopefully I'll be able to get out there and fish with you. If you're ever in Park City, you let me know.
Yeah. No, I'll be up there. I got to, I actually need to go by that. What is that? The High West Distillery?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that stuff's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a real good, yeah.
I think that's in your neck of wood.
Yeah, it is. It's right down the road. So, yeah, give me a jingle. We'll get out on the water.
Awesome. Well, I'll stay in touch, but thank you so much. And also, if you're having a hard time, talk to somebody. And my problem with PTSD is I never talk to people about it.
Yeah.
When I opened up about it, all my problems seem to fall off my shoulders. I'm a whole different person now because of it. But just be open, find a way that you can open up and address that, whether it's fishing, floating, or just talking to buddies.
Yep. Excellent advice. That's what friends and family are there for, even strangers. You'd be surprised. And you made the comment of it took a lot of weight off of your shoulders, and that's okay. There's enough shoulders to go around to help out. That's why they're there. So just like that rucksack, man, you got to work together.
Yeah, that's a fact.
All right, brother. Good to have you on the show. And that wraps us up for this week. We'll see you, Ben.
Awesome.